expect that of you for some reason.
All right. Can't take him anywhere. Right here. That's right.
Before we turn the light on.
This lights are really bright.
That's why you won't fall. Cold and gray.
No, bright lights make you squint your eyes, so you do fall.
Coldness in here?
Sorry, but you don't have to ask.
You know, I was again. But tomorrow morning.
The hour of 7 o'clock having arrived, 7:14 to be exact. We reconvene the Audit Commission. Mr. Weems, would you join us at the table, sir? Joining us at the table is Malcolm Weems. If you would, for our court reporter, please announce and spell your name and your attorney as well.
My name is Malcolm Weems. That's Malcolm, M-A-L-C-O-L-M. The last name is Weems, W-E-E-M-S. My attorney.
I represent Malcolm Weems. My name is Lisa, thank you, Noller, N-O-L-L-E-R.
Welcome. Malcolm, would you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do, yes.
Okay. Welcome to the Audit Commission. Thank you for coming in to talk with us about the performance audit of the state monies provided to the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority. Would you like to make any opening comments?
Yes, please. Thank you. My name is Malcolm Weems, and as you know, I served as the Chief of Staff of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget in 2010. As such, I had many duties related to fiscal management statewide, and knowing that all sectors of government intersect and are tracked by the Budget Office, especially those deemed sensitive in time and an impact. I also served as a member of the Illinois Anti-Violence Commission. The commission itself is made up of individuals who have lost loved ones to gun violence. The gun violence issue in Chicago is not a new one. I outlived my father by the time I turned 21 because of gun violence. My uncle shot and killed my cousin, his son. My other cousin was a perpetrator of gun violence. During high school and college, I lost half a dozen friends to gun violence. The violence in Chicago has been a constant in my life since August 3rd, 1974, when my father was murdered in front of his home by a person he grew up with. I say all of this to clarify where my dedication to anti-violence efforts come from. Personal passion and responsibility for making sure government runs and addresses the needs of citizens summarizes my involvement in NRI. The need for NRI is still evident today. Our commitment was sincere, and many of us continue to do work in the anti-violence community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your opening comments. And questions, members of the committee?
Frank.
Okay. Representative Sandak.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Weems.
Good evening.
Ms. Knoller. I was struck by one comment you mentioned, and obviously, sorry for your loss. It's a horrific background that you had with respect to gun violence. It's unimaginable. And connected to that was your comment that our commitment was sincere. What commitment and who's us in that comment?
And again, that was my personal statement as it relates to the events that lead us here. So when I talk about that, I talk about the folks that I worked with, and when the NRI program was put together, the people that I interacted with, why I was involved, and why I personally really was happy to be involved.
But who are you referring to as?
I'm talking, in general, the administration, the governor's administration.
Okay. We've heard from a number of witnesses today with respect to NRI. I still can't figure out whose idea it was, the concept of the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. Do you know?
I don't know if we could attribute it to any one person. I would say that the idea about doing something about the violence in the city of Chicago was something that was the community and all of us. We all live, not all of us, but many of us lived in Chicago. It was something that we saw every day. I live on the south side of Chicago still, and it hasn't stopped since 2010. So it was something that was always on our minds. So when the public started asking questions about it, I think that's when there was this conversation that started about doing something.
I certainly appreciate that, but someone or some people had to have said, we're going to call it the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, and this is what we're going to try and do. That's what I'm trying to find out.
Oh, so you're talking, again, so I just saw that I'm...
NRI. I'm trying to figure out...
Just the name NRI? Oh, it was someone in the governor's office. I wouldn't say exactly. I think it started off with Save Our Children, and people were calling it the Neighborhood Recovery Project, and then at some point the governor made an announcement that it was the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative.
And as it evolved from Save Our Children, Neighborhood Recovery Project, Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, the documents we've had through the audit revealed that it started out as maybe a $10 million initiative in August of 2010, and then pretty rapidly it grew in size and scope. Do you know how it came to go from 10 million to 50 million in 2010?
Again, and I'm just trying to remember, and again, forgive me for taking a moment here, but I think what happened was we needed to see what the program was going to look like. I'm not a program person, so when we talk about budgeting, for, let's just say, for an initiative or a purpose of funding, the question is going to be, what does the program look like that you're going to put together? And that has to be done, and once that's done, you could, again, depending on what resources are available, you can decide how much you want to put towards those.
Well, in the instance of this program, again, the documents show that it kind of got bigger in a real quick hurry. Mm-hmm. And I'm just trying to find out what your role or involvement was with respect to how the project grew.
So if we're talking about my role or the decision to increase, I think I didn't make the decision to, right.
Separate them then.
So,
what's your role?
so my role is twofold. As I said, I was the chief of staff of the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, but I was also on the Anti-Violence Commission. So once, when everyone, again, us on the Anti-Violence Commission, this issue didn't start in 2010. So when we were brought together and we dealt with a number of different issues. There was the abolishing the death penalty and we were asked by the governor as survivors how we felt about that. So it became kind of a gradual progression when the community, when these children started being killed on the south and west sides of Chicago, and there were many community folks that had come in. Me personally, I asked to be a member of the Anti-Violence Commission because at the time when they were putting the commission together, folks in the administration did not know my background. And so as more of this started to happen and it started to take center stage, so my involvement started there as being a person, again, that people asked my opinion as a commission member. But as we started to move into the budget season, the question was over the summer, coming into the end of that fiscal year, which would have been fiscal year 10, we started looking at the budget and what could be done in terms of how much we could fund for programming. And that was something that had started in the end of fiscal year 2010. So I worked in the budget office. And so we were tasked with asking how much money did we have available to do something with, and what ideas we could come up with so that we could put together a robust program.
I want you to focus on August of 2010, around that period of time. You were chief of staff for management and budget at that time?
Yes.
How often would you speak with the governor with respect to your duties and responsibilities?
Not often. Again, there was the director of GOMB, David Vaught, who probably spoke to the governor a lot more than I did. But I had, during putting together the budget, we had meetings, but I wouldn't say I talked to the governor once a week or anything like that, but there were moments when we were getting down to crunch time, finishing up the budget, or if there were certain things that we needed, the governor's office needed expertise from the budget office. There were a number of times that I was called in. But again, David Vaught was the director who was called in probably more than myself.
There was, the record in this instance with respect to emails and documents, press coverage, et cetera, it's pretty clear that in July or August, the governor had a meeting with some African-American ministers in the Roseland community because of their grave concern about the continuing violence occurring in their neighborhood and other neighborhoods. From what I can read, at or about that time, the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, as it was known now, was being talked about by a variety of people, and your name is on a lot of those emails. Have you seen those emails?
I've seen some. I have not seen all of them. But if you're asking me, I guess, is there a question? Yeah, I've seen some of them, not all of them.
All right. And what I'm trying to get an understanding of is who was on the team, if it was a team, who were the responsible people for trying to roll out this neighborhood initiative, recovery initiative, to quell violence in the city of Chicago and in certain southern suburbs?
So I had been in meetings on that, and that would have been myself. I was there. Dr. Irving was there. Again, we ended up talking with Director Shaw. There were different people in and out from the governor's office that would have had some, again, with any program that's being rolled out, you're going to check with the program people, you're going to check with the budget office to make sure we have the funding, and then you're probably going to talk to, again, any other experts that have any knowledge of whatever that program is going to be about.
Was Jack Lavin involved in those discussions?
He was the chief operating officer, I believe, at that time. So yes.
And do you recall discussions in or around August of 2010 with respect to NRI?
Not specifically, but if you talk about a particular, again, in terms of the date, I'm not sure, but yes, definitely we had conversations about that.
What was your role? If you had to say what your role was, was there a day-to-day role that you had with respect to NRI?
No, not a day-to-day role. Again, it was the funding, making sure that we were in constant communication about the funding, understanding what it was, how we were going to be rolling out funding. Those were things that I was, was involved in terms of monitoring and managing. Also, again, my personal interest in it, again, for where I sat on the Illinois Anti-Violence Commission.
Let's talk about the funding, because as Chief of Staff for Management and Budget, that's certainly something in your wheelhouse at that time
Absolutely.
in 2010.
Absolutely.
What do you recall being, how this program was going to be funded? Where was the money coming from?
So in fiscal year 2010, the General Assembly, you all passed a budget that was lump sum. And that lump sum budget was coming to an end, and there was funding still available from those lump sums. And so as we talked about what to do, usually the problem with the fiscal year, of course, and many of you already know this, is that it ends June 30th. So when you try to do things related to helping young people with jobs and things of that nature, having summer programs is very difficult to get started because funding is not in place. With all of the attention on the violence and literally every day, you were scared to go and get the paper on Monday morning because it was going to say 30 kids got shot. So we felt like we had to do something, and so we started looking for, at least in the budget office, ways to, if there were ways that we could start programs or fund programs from the lump sum throughout the summer. And that actually, because it took longer, I believe, to get it started, that from the summer it moved on, and when it started, of course, as you know, in the fall.
Mr. Weems, I'm going to have pulled out an email that's been discussed with other people that have testified here today of September 6th that was sent to you from Barbara Shaw. And I'm
Okay.
going to ask you to look at it, see if it refreshes your recollection.
Okay.
You'll get a copy in just a minute. Yeah, sorry, 29. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. It's for her. You had a chance to look at that, Mr.
Yes,
Reis?
yes.
Thank you. Do you recall that email being sent to you?
I don't remember it specifically, but I'm sure. I mean, yes.
Is there anything about it that you look at it now that looks like it's inaccurate or not?
Not at first reading, no, not at all.
Whose idea was it to have the involvement of aldermen with respect to determining lead agencies?
I'm not exactly sure who came up with using the alderman. What I do know is that there had started being discussion, and I don't know who the person was that brought it up, but I do remember there being discussions about working closely with the communities, and that there had been some outreach to aldermen to talk to them about, because again, a lot of the ministers that had come and started talking about this violence, they had, I guess, already started having some conversations with the aldermen.
Well, I mean, clearly there was, because
Yeah.
this is what Ms. Shaw is saying, and ultimately it became, that's how lead agencies were basically determined. Isn't that correct?
That is to my knowledge.
Whose idea was that?
I'm not sure about that.
Give me the universe of possibilities. I mean, we have a pretty close group of people, right? This didn't happen. I mean, it was either the governor himself, you, Mr. Lavin, Ms. Shaw. Who else could it have been?
Well, I think there could be a number of people talking to those folks. I'm just not exactly sure whose idea it was to say alderman.
Did you
However,
object at this
no,
time?
not at all. No.
Okay, do you think that was the best way of doing, this project?
Again, I'm not a program person, but I do think it's important to talk to people that are closer to the affected citizens that we're talking about.
No argument there. But of course, best practices, RFPs, making sure things are tested and value propositions occur. You being a budget person, that means something to you, I would assume, too, right?
Absolutely.
At the time of this memo, early September, do you know the size from a budgetary component of what the NRI program was supposed to be?
By this,
September of 2010?
I'm going to assume that by September, it had already, I'm going to assume, and again, I'm not exactly sure, but I would think that by this time, it had gotten to the $50 million mark.
How did it get there? How did it get to the $50 million mark?
Again, it would have been based on funding that we had available and what the programmatic needs are. Again, I'm not a program person, but I do know that as you talk, if you look at the communities, the number of communities that you want to affect, you end up spending more money.
From a funding component, where did the $50 million come from? Do you remember?
Yes, actually. So as I stated earlier, there were funds available still from the previous fiscal year that were deposited into a fund, an unappropriated fund that was housed at IVPA.
How much was unappropriated funds that were available for IVPA?
I couldn't give you the exact dollar amount, but again, we ended up at 54 million. And there was probably, as I can remember, when we first started talking about this, there were more funds than that available at towards the end of the fiscal year, but all of those funds, I don't believe were moved to be used for the NRI program.
Mr. Weems, I'm going to try and dig out minutes of an IVPA meeting. I believe the date is September 29th or 30 of 2010. When the document's located, I'll show it to you, but what I'm interested in is a notation, and again, it'll be coming in a second, that attributes a comment to you. Malcolm explained that the governor's office is committed to allocating some of the funds for this initiative immediately and will allocate the rest after the election. Does that sound like something you said, sir?
No, what was asked was, it was a question that was asked, and thank you. A question was asked, so if I may, let me set the stage. I was accompanying Ms. Shaw to what I thought was a board meeting for IVPA, and she asked me to go, and I actually, when she was starting on working on the program, I went to a lot of these types of meetings when there was going to be public whatever back and forth, and I wanted to be there to reassure people that we had the funding. What had happened when this is around the time where the state had started running up these unpaid bills, and what many of you may or may not know, that when you're dealing with social service agencies, usually the ones hardest hit when we're not paying our bills, they become gun shy. They don't want to participate because they think the state may or may not pay or may not pay for a long time, and that puts them at risk. We could easily put them out of business by not paying them within 30 days. And so a lot of what I was doing was going so that people could ask fiscal questions. Is there really funding for this program? Is this really going to happen? So when I was there at the IVPA board meeting, there were questions about, and there was all kinds of questions, but my biggest focus was saying we had funding set aside for this initiative, and that it was there, and that we had worked with the comptroller's office to make sure it was there, and that we weren't going to have a program where young people started working and then couldn't be paid, because that was exactly the opposite of what we wanted to happen.
Well, I thank you for that elaboration, but what I want to focus on is the sentence. And it
was a question. Someone had asked a question, and I at the time, and I can't remember verbatim how it was asked, but I felt like they were being facetious, and they were trying to imply that we didn't have the money and that we weren't going to really do something. So I only answered a question. I didn't make a statement. These were people that were on a board. These weren't people receiving any money. So they were asking a question, and there was a bit of, as I recollect, there was a bit of, they weren't real sure that the program was really going to take off, and that they wanted to make sure that there was funding there. So I answered those questions.
And I appreciate that. If you look at the document, which is this board meeting minutes of September 30, 2010, if you look at maybe the second paragraph, at the time at least, the contemplated program was $30 million, and not quite 50 million yet, at least as of the date of these minutes. And the last paragraph does indeed reference a discussion regarding payment for this initiative, and that the fact the state had been late on existing bills. But again, the second sentence, I want you to focus just on that sentence. Malcolm explained that the governor's office is committed to allocating some of the funds for this initiative immediately and will allocate the rest after the election. Was that statement something you said at that meeting?
No, this I did not say. I mean, again, by this sentence, this is inaccurate. I answered a question. I responded to a question.
Okay.
And so in my response to that question, what I was saying was that if you're asking if we're going to get money out on the street before the election, I mean, that would be great, but we are not going to do that. We're not going to be able to do that. It was my impression, it was September 30th at that time, it was my impression that this board had to approve this spending, number one. And again, the election, of course, whatever, and when the question was asked was not that far away. I work in the budget office. It usually takes time to get things paid.
With respect, again, the word in this memorandum of minutes is election. Was there any pressure to get this program funded, whether it was $30 or $50 million, before the election coming up in November?
No, no, there was no pressure put on, I think, me. My pressure was, again, I live on the south side of Chicago, and I see little black and brown children get killed all the time. And that was my personal pressure, but there was no pressure put on me by anyone else.
Okay. The reason again, these questions come because of the words in this memo.
Absolutely.
Ms. Shaw testified earlier today that the Illinois Violence Prevention Authority, prior to July or August of 2010, was a relatively small department that had $9 to $11 million in appropriations, and it's usually a funding group. This contemplation of NRI throwing $50 million at it is a big endeavor for this group, was it not?
Yes, it was.
How is it that this sum of money, $50 million, lands on a relatively small, small organization or agency within state government?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, the fund that actually that the dollars were actually housed in was actually an IVPA fund. But more than that, Barbara Shaw was the person that had the most experience with dealing with anti-violence issues. Again, she was known for the work she had done.
But you're a budget guy. She didn't have experience running $50 million and overseeing a program of this size or scope.
I understand that. I understand that.
So didn't that concern you at the time?
In all honesty, I will say this again, and you all probably get tired of hearing it. Where I live, it is no one pays enough to live. So when the governor was willing to do this, I didn't think at all about, is it too monumental a task? It's going on. It's happening. Kids are dying. So no, I didn't view it that way. I was excited. I was happy.
But of course, Mr. Williams, you're a budget guy. You want to see it work too, right?
I absolutely want to see it work. I don't think those two things are at ends. I think at the same time, what we decided was to come up with a program. And so when we worked with Barbara and she put together these components of the program, program people were involved. I'm not a program person. I was a budget person at the time. And what I know is if you want to find out what people value, see where they spend their money. And so we were spending our money on something that we cared about. So I was very happy, and I followed along to make sure all of the things that needed to be done from the budget office perspective were done. So that was my concern.
And was everything that should be done from a budget perspective done properly?
In my eyes, yes. From a budget perspective, yes. I think there were some things that probably, again, one thing in particular, there was advice given about how to do some tracking. And again, I'm not specific on it because, again, I just kind of knew this happened afterwards. That wasn't taken. But I think at the end of the day, the plan that was shown to myself and to others in the governor's office was a good one.
And what was the plan?
Again, the program, which is the components and what those components, again, I don't believe that anti-violence is monolithic in any way. At least, again, that's my personal belief. But again, the program folks didn't believe that either. So they had a number of different components, I think 4 or 5 components. and they had a dollar amount, so a budget assigned to each, and it looked good.
Have you ever seen the audit report from the Auditor General?
It's been a while, but I had seen it.
And did you take issue with any of the findings or recommendations from the Auditor General and his office?
Well, I'm an accounting major by education, so I don't take issue with them, but I think that in some ways again, I think that the context is important. So I don't know, again, I don't want to say I take issue, but I might disagree with certain things.
Is there anything you can think of as you sit here today that you disagree with?
Well, something that I heard, I think, again, when we talk about hastily, put together programming, I think that it was a crisis. And so, for example, there have been many emergencies in this state that we just kind of take care of the emergency first and we fill out the paperwork later. That happens every year, by the way, whether it be a storm, whether there be some other kind of horrific accident where people lose their life or their property. This state tends to rally together and act. And then we take care of paperwork afterwards. It happens every year.
To your knowledge, has the paperwork been taken care of with respect to the NRI program?
Again, I'm not sure. Again, I was the chief of staff there up until the following year, June. I didn't follow the program in terms of the operations of the program after it really got started. But I think for the most part, up to where I was specifically involved, I thought it was moving along as it should.
Well, I mean, you've expressed pretty emotionally and convincingly the profound personal investment you made with respect to this, because this was essentially a very personal issue for you. Once the money is out and these programs are starting to put into place, you didn't monitor the effectiveness or the efficacy of the program?
Well, we didn't say effectiveness. I asked about effectiveness. You asked me, did I monitor paperwork and making sure paperwork was done? No, I did not do that.
Did you monitor the program in any way, shape, or form?
I asked about the program. I see anti-violence advocates all the time, and many of them were happy.
With respect to NRI?
Yeah.
Okay, but so what involvement did you have as far as monitoring the program after?
I had no, for my job, I had no work to do afterwards, after the funding was established. What I did was I talked to people in communities. That's what I did personally to see how the program was going. Barbara's office was on the 4th floor. She would come and see me sometimes, and we'd talk, but not specifically about work to do that, just how are things going. And
all right, let me just break a couple things down, because you mentioned the term hastily put together, and that was one of the findings of the audit, because the time period, at least from the record established, is roughly late August, through October. We have, at least from the record, the inception of a program and then the attempt to fund a program in really short order of $50 million.
Well, technically, I don't think we moved funding before the end of the prior fiscal year, which ended in June. So I think the concept of wanting to do something really is before August. I think when you're talking about August, you're talking a little bit more specific of what the program looks like at the end, right? So again, so my time period's a little, in my mind, is a little broader than yours.
But do you have documents that go to June that talk about the NRI or?
Well, no, other than the fact that that the funding that was deposited into the IVPA fund had to take place before August. So the thinking about doing something related to this had to have been prior to August.
Were you involved in that thinking?
Yeah, I was in the budget office, absolutely.
Okay, and who was part of this thinking?
Well, this is the governor's office. This is the same folks. I mean, we're Jack Lavin, Tony Irving, because there are community groups that are coming in to talk to the governor's office, probably starting as early as March, April.
Are there emails or documents that show communications with respect to this initiative or plan you're talking about? Because we have nothing that starts in that early.
I don't know if there are emails or, again, this is folks come into the office and when there are things that affect the community and there might be some fiscal nature to them, we'll have a meeting. It's not always that we would send emails about it, but I know that what was asked of me was to come up with recommendations because we had funding left over. and we wanted to do something.
From the record it do so far, at least, the timeline isn't March, it's really August. And from August to October, this NRI program is born and looks like it's funded in pretty short order. In your experience working in state government, can you think of another instance where some program, at least in paper, in a timeline of 3 months, comes from inception to funding in that type of time period?
I can't think of any one specifically, no. But I'm also not, again, I don't build programs in state government.
So in addition to the hastily constructed nature that the auditor found, they say that there were other deficiencies, and some of them were pervasive, to use the right term, including a lack of documentation on the selection of the communities to receive money. You made a very personal and very emotional set of comments with respect to how violence has affected you. There are obviously such other instances in other parts of the city as well. And from what I can glean, a number of communities were not within the scope of NRI, even though they were in the top 20 as the most violent areas in the city. Do you know how the 23 communities were selected, Mr. Reams?
Actually, I do not know exactly how. Again, what I knew at the time was that there was there was crime data or poverty data that was used. Again, I'm not an expert in that.
But did you ever see anything that showed the data and any analysis to determine?
I did not see anything. I had not seen anything.
All right.
Inglewood was in there. Where I grew up was in there.
West Inglewood wasn't, though.
And I don't know how they were chosen. I don't.
Okay, but obviously, if this program, we're going to spend the kind of money we're going to spend, we want it to work, right? Every good-hearted person.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
and so did you ever get the impression that perhaps some communities weren't involved in this equation and had somehow been excluded?
If you're asking, yes, I think there's always going to be communities that, listen, violence is going to probably exists everywhere. So I think you're right. I think there's going to be some people that are going to feel left out. But again, from where I stood, we had the best person we could have running it, and that was Barbara Shaw. So again, we knew, there was no direction that I had heard of by anyone not to pick a particular community. There was just data that was used to arrive at the communities that they picked.
In one of the deficiencies outlined in the audit was that NRI lead agencies were not competitively selected for state funds. There was no competitive process. It was selective, and that's what we're kind of talking about right now. And I can tell you, I don't know of anyone that's testified that can show us a piece of paper that shows the analysis of any type of scientific or data-driven analysis as to how communities in the city of Chicago and beyond were selected to receive money, and how some communities and areas of the city were not. And so that's one of the criticisms. Do you have any idea why there was no competitive selection process?
Again, we're just talking, okay, so the lead agencies, not communities.
Correct.
Okay, so with lead agencies, no. What I do know is I have a pretty extensive background in procurement with the state of Illinois, and I know that when you're dealing with grants versus a procurement for goods or services, it's different. And there are a lot of subjective views involved in grants versus when you're making a business decision. So again, I just know that they're different.
Yeah, but you're a budget
guy,
guy, right? You're a budget guy, and that means sometimes you have to have data that shows.
Agree. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And there are community organizations that existed in different areas of the city that had established track records that could have bid to be lead agencies that were obviously not permitted to do so because of the path undertaken with NRI to utilize aldermen and their suggestions for lead agencies. Do you think that's best practices?
I'm not really qualified to say that in that particular. Again, I didn't do grants when I was in state government. However, I would say that we all would want to cover as much or as many lives as we possibly could, but I'm just not qualified to say if that's what the best practices are on that. I apologize.
There was other criticisms, and obviously there were several criticisms with the program. One of them was the paperwork and the follow-up and the accountability. Taking into consideration the emotional component of trying to quell violence and trying to get a really unstable situation stabilized. There still needs to be accountability, right? We need to know where dollars go. We need to know that they're being used wisely. These are tax dollars after all. They're not our money, it's the people's money. Did you have any thoughts on the propriety of, or I guess the auditor's comments that not good practices were utilized, less than best practices occurred, and pretty shabby paperwork, and sometimes non-existent paperwork occurred with respect to NRI?
I believe that there were some things that could have been done better. Again, I'm just not that familiar with all of the issues that, again, I can't remember all of them, but I think there were things that definitely could have been done better.
Fast forward after the election in November, NRI's money's getting out there, organizations are ostensibly plying their trade, trying to help put people to work, offer counseling, after school projects, things that are important. Was there any follow-up from Mr. Lavin, yourself, Dr. Irving, Mr. Ocasio, Ms. Shaw? Was there ever a follow-up meeting saying, hey, here's what we've got, here's how far we are on this program, here's what we've done, and taking kind of stock of what's gone on? Do you recall that type of group session after the election?
After?
Right.
I cannot say that I remember that. That included me.
One of the other, this goes into the paperwork component, and you said it could have been done better. IVPA untimely approved contracts. There were 33 NRI contracts that had no execution date or no approval by IVPA. Did you know that, Mr. Weems?
No, I did not.
Lead agencies expended $46.2 million for NRI. Over $37 million was for day-to-day operations. Did you know that, Mr. Weems?
No, I did not.
Was there any follow-up after, well, I should have asked you this. When did you leave state service?
When did I leave that office or leave just state?
service
Oh, I
in
left
its
state service a year and 5 days ago. Yeah.
We'll round it up to a year.
Yeah.
So go a year and a half plus backwards in time. Had there been any involvement by you with
No, there had
respect to taking stock of this?
No, there had not. And so to put and to give you to add to the timeline, so that following beginning of the summer, end of the spring, I had moved over to CMS. The governor had appointed me to a new job as director.
Mr. Weems, there was a series of email that we got yesterday, and I understand there's more stuff coming in today, such is the way of obtaining documents. But there was some email that came in yesterday from Mr. Lavin talking about activities on the campaign side and the need to essentially utilize the NRI program. And I want to read it to you because I don't want to get it wrong. This is from a September 5th, ironically, 2010 email. If we're trying to get the base out, and that's the key to our victory, it's page 6, I'm sorry, page 6. Let me catch you, let you guys catch up, Ms. Noller. It's not paginated. You have to do it the old-fashioned way. Sorry. At the very bottom, and then you'll go to the next page. It starts on September 5, 2010. Do you see that? The very bottom.
Okay. Yep.
And then turn the page. So that's where I'm at. If we're trying to get the base out, and that's our key to victory, we better prioritize correctly. We spent a lot of money in the AA community in the primary. We did a lot of robocalls utilizing Congressman Davis, Rush, and Jackson. We also did radio with the same people. Obama can be positive and get people to be more excited about PQ. The congressman and an ad like Andy suggests from a typical AA family, particularly women, can say why Brady would be a disaster. The AA community tends to break late, so we need to have some time. So we have some time. The governor's Neighborhood Recovery Initiative will also help on the jobs and anti-violence messages. Do you see that, Mr. Weems?
Yes.
Were you ever part
Yes.
of any communications with respect to getting the NRI program going before November 4, 2010?
Just so that I'm clear, are you asking me like these kinds of this campaign stuff? No. If you're asking if we were talking now, if you're asking when we were working on the program, from what I originally thought we were going to try, because I know that living in Chicago, the summer is the worst. So you want to do it quickly, and so there was no there was no one saying, beat the election, if that's your question. But I think many of us, and again, I shouldn't speak for other folks, but I can speak for myself, wanted, again, I mean, the sooner it happened, the more lives we saved.
But we're in fall. I mean, we're close to fall right now, right? And of course, the election's in November. This sure looks like, at least from Mr. Lavin's perspective, that this can be helpful to get this program going for purposes of reelection. Did anyone ever tell you to hurry up? Because hastily put this program together.
No, not at all. Not at all.
You're a realist. You're a South Sider, so you understand the political sport that elections sometimes become. Was it your intention to move this project quickly along to occur before November 4, 2010?
Was it my intention?
Yes, sir.
The only thing that I wanted to see happen was for them to do it instantly. Because if you're referring to my realism, is I know that everybody comes around talking to black people about what we can do to help your community when there's an election. That doesn't mean anything to me at all. What does is the fact that the sooner we get something done, again, as I said in my opening statement, this is 40 years and running for me. And just like the kids that are getting shot by people they know that are their age now, that's what happened to my father. So any waste of time is a waste of time to me. So immediate is always better. It had nothing to do with it. It still has nothing to do with an election.
Do you think the NRI program worked?
I think the NRI program saved children's lives.
Do you know how many?
Nope.
Do you have any idea how we could measure the efficacy of the program?
I think trying to measure how many kids don't get shot is like measuring how many terrorist attacks we didn't have. What I know is this, is that there's a time period during the day where kids are most susceptible to getting hurt because either their parents are working or something of that nature. And I know that the more that they're involved in doing something, they're not on the corner. And if they're not on the corner, they're not getting shot. And again, that's my personal belief.
Understood. So with respect to the supposed shuttering of the program by the governor's been quoted as saying in multiple media outlets that once he learned what happened with the program, ostensibly the results of the concepts that make up the audit, he shut it down. Were you involved in the decision to shut down NRI?
No, I was not.
Do you think it was a good decision?
I think it was a decision that he had to make because he has to deal with the public trust. I don't. I'm not an elected official. So I'm not really even interested in how many people think these kinds of programs are good or bad, because I know at the end of the day, we're talking about some child's life on the other end. So would I have done that? Probably not. But I think the governor has different concerns and different credibility issues with taxpayers than I do. That's why he ran for governor and I did not. So do I think it was a good idea? I think it might have been a good idea for him. Would I have done it? Of course not. We're different people and we see the world different. And he has a different responsibility than I have.
And your responsibility, though, was to give him information with respect to budgets and managing budgets. And obviously, with respect to this program, looking only at it from a budgetary component. Did you get the information you needed as far as the efficacy of the project, where the dollars went, whether it was a good investment?
So when we talk about budgeting is on the front end,
right?
Right, and so the compliance people and the people that do the monitoring and when we have audits done after programs are running, those folks will kind of figure out the effectiveness. What you do when you're doing the budget is saying we want to fund an effort to deal with whatever this issue is, and what you try to get is information on the front end about what are we going to be funding. Right, there was a push a few years ago, budgeting for results. Right, so the idea from a budget perspective isn't to fund something and then sit next to the person and watch them do it. No, there's different directors that run agencies that do that. So what we got was the components that Barbara Shaw had outlined for us, and those. At all of the planning and that structure was satisfactory for us in terms of the budget.
Well, but then there's another budget the next year, correct?
Correct.
And so you take into effect experience from the prior year when you run another budget, right? You don't just say, we we spent that money, we're never going to look at it again. It wasn't.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely. But again,
So, I
that's
mean,
done
it's
by
forward-looking, but there is a component of backwards-looking too for, determining where it sits.
Right, but that's when you, so now we're talking about the budget process for the state of Illinois, and that's where you have agency directors sit with their finance people and some program people to say, Malcolm or Director Vaught, this is where we think we should spend more money because this was very effective, this worked, or we want to change programming, and that's part of the budget process. Again, but those agencies are advocates for programming and what we should continue and what we should, cancel. And it's our job to weigh the other needs, from other agencies, whether you're weighing education and human services or what have you, in determining what the final budget should look like to at least make a proposal to the General Assembly.
Just a couple more questions, Mr. Williams. I'm sure others have them. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Thanks. Mr. Weems, with respect to an earlier comment you made, I think you testified that you worked with the Comptroller's Office to make sure funding was in place.
Right.
Correct?
Yes.
Tell me, I'm going to ask, I forgot, hey, Tom, can you grab, what is it? Patrick has it. Oh, Patrick has it? It's a 10/4/10 through 10/5/10 email.
Okay.
Tell me about that email between you and Mr. Lavin of October 4, 2010 and October 5, 2010.
He was asking where I was, and I had been working on a program to get vendors' bills paid. And so he was wondering where I was and wanted me to be somewhere available Wednesday for something for NRI. And I just, basically was telling him why this was important. And again, my interaction in NRI is mostly, again, making sure that budget was in place, but I'm really not, I'm African American, but I'm not always a person that deals with the programming. So again, and I'm just speculating what his thought was, but this email is about asking me where I was because it was an important, NRI was important, and I was explaining to him that I was out of town doing something else.
What is the cutting out of the middleman and confirming cash availability?
So, all right, so let me make sure I read this properly. So what I would do if we were talking to the Comptroller's Office about making a payment or moving cash, or because funding and cash are not the same thing in the state of Illinois. So you can have a bunch of funding available and people can turn in bills and they will sit there if there's no cash available. So what you end up having to do is make sure that that when you talk to the comptroller, that they're ready to get it, right? They're ready to receive these. They may have a plan to pay down debt service that week, or they may be paying some other bills that week. So the idea is to stay in contact with them and not have other people do it. I wanted to keep, I tried to keep the conversations high level enough. I think at the time we might have been working with their chief of staff. This is under Comptroller Hines. This isn't the current comptroller. So again, the idea was to talk to them directly so they knew that, that we took this program very seriously, and that if we did not pay or get the cash out, in any regular semblance of order, that it would be problematic for the program, and thus would affect children.
So you were in New York talking with who?
No. So I think what he was, and again, this is him asking me where I was,
Right.
and me kind of knowing why he wanted me around. It's still, in my mind, it was a phone call. It's not going to be me having to go into someone's office and sit down with them, and because we already talked about this.
Okay, what are you confirming cash for in that memo?
So so we have funding, right? And so you have to have cash. You talk about having cash because if the program is going to be rolling out soon, then you're going to get invoices. And so you talk about when you get invoices, you want to make sure there's going to be cash available. Again, this isn't giving a specific date because you have to wait for the comptroller to tell you what the real cash is.
That's really what I'm asking. So
Right.
you're not talking with the comptroller here,
Right.
though.
Well, I was explaining to Jack because, so when I was gone, the idea was you got to be right here because we're rolling out this big program. Why aren't you right here? And I was trying to explain to him I can make the phone call so no one has to do any talking for us to make sure that there's cash available whenever we're ready.
Okay, was this a typical way of getting cash for a program, though? I mean, you're
Letting the comptroller know. I mean, this is all this is, it's coordinating, right? So when you're in the Office of Management Budget and your people are going to spend money, you coordinate. And so because children are going to be paid. So the difference between saying we got to pay the guy that delivers, materials to a prison versus paying young people that are in some program that you've done is that if you don't pay these young people after they work whatever their hours are, it has more of an impact, right? It teaches them the wrong thing. It teaches them that you can do a day's work and not be paid for 6 months. That's not what we're trying to do. And the impact to that community is more heartfelt than it would be, with a business. So when you're coordinating, the idea is to make sure everyone is prepared. I coordinated for debt service on all kinds of on bonds. We do that all the time. Or when you had to pay Medicaid now, right? So you have to make sure you move cash out of GRF into different funds, whether it's health insurance, right, for everyone's health insurance here. So you always have to coordinate when you have cash problems like the state does.
Last question for me, Mr. Weems. From the governor's office perspective, who is the person most knowledgeable about NRI?
In my view, the most knowledgeable person would have been Barbara Shaw.
Was she part of the governor's office?
Oh,
though?
in the governor's office? Oh, she
Right.
reported up to Tony Irving.
So you'd say she was the most knowledgeable person about NRI?
Again, I followed it, so I would say Tony would be the most knowledgeable about what we were trying to do, whether getting information from Barbara and making sure that there was some kind of coordinated effort with the governor's office. That would have been
And
Tony.
I have one more. Who is the most responsible person for articulating what was going on with this program and transferring that information to the governor?
I don't know that for sure. I don't know that for sure.
Would you assume it's Mr. Lavin?
I would assume that.
Thank you.
Just a quick clarification. I do believe that you answered it, Malcolm.
I'm sorry.
But in the transfers, which are a main point in this audit, towards the end of the fiscal year, transfers were made into non-appropriated funds. Now, at that time when the lump sums were available, that there was an option for transfers at that point that has since been repealed. I believe that was in the BIMP bill language. Who authorized the transfer to the non-appropriated fund? I think you mentioned, I've been waiting for that answer all day, actually.
Okay. So authorization, I know that
Someone had to say.
we made a recommendation. So
You
our
made a
office was asked.
recommendation to who?
So I'm gonna tell you. So we were asked what we could do. We had our analysts run through 900 and some odd funds that exist, and there were recommendations. I made recommendations. I think I would have given them up through Director Vaught, and he would have had a meeting with, again, maybe Jack Lavin, but I know that there had been questions, so we'd have kind of follow-up meetings about how would this work, what would the timing be, but I think the recommendation came out of GOM.
David Vaught.
Again, and I'm just trying to remember.
You were chief of staff, he was director.
That's right.
Recommendation came from David Vaught.
Well, the recommendation came up through the GOMB and was given to David Vaught. Yes.
Okay. And since then, and from that point going forward, because that's what concerns all of the budgetary people that are on here, and you got a few of them that are on we can't do that anymore. I believe the comptroller's office also needed to look through the 900 funds and sign off on anything in the past. I think that has been taken out. Am I correct?
I'm currently, no, because I think what we were looking at that particular year, because of those lump sums, look, in general, I think I get to your point, and that is, how can you have funding?
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
My
yeah.
point is that funds to non-appropriated funds at the end of the fiscal year were listed out and billed as expended funds when they weren't.
Well, so that's why I want to make a clarification.
Right.
During
Thank
that year, 2010, fiscal year 2010, the actual enacted budget bill, as I remember it, and again, you all may check that, but it defined expenses. And then when it defined expenses, deposits into another fund was in the definition. So that, again, so I don't think this was for every year.
No, as a matter of fact,
It
it
was
was
just for that.
repealed. That is correct. That
Okay,
was in
okay.
the language for that year. But since that point and prior to the time you left, I almost said representative, sorry about that, but you are president of the auditors.
I would just like to clarify that, Malcolm. That was an argument that was made by one of the legal counsels in the Office of Management and Budget, and we just simply asked for the documentation to substantiate that claim. We're still waiting for that documentation.
It's in the enacted budget bill for 2010.
I think you could have easily pulled that out and sent it to us if that's there.
Well, I had not been asked that. It's an enacted bill. It's in the definition of expenses.
Which fiscal year are you talking about?
The one that ends June 30th, 2010. That would be fiscal year 10.
Okay, so the funds we're talking about are fiscal year.
10.
No, they're not.
Yes, they are.
They're fiscal year 11.
No, fiscal year 11 started on July 1 of 2010.
Correct.
Right.
Okay,
But
so-
we're talking about the funds that came from the prior fiscal year. I believe that's what the representative was.
The press conference that laid out the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative was October 6th of
So
2010.
I'll take a step back so that we can all be on the same page.
Yeah.
I thought what the representative was asking me was to kind of clarify and who was involved in taking funding from fiscal year 2010, putting it in an unappropriated fund that was being used in fiscal year 2011. That's what I thought we were. Again, correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, I don't know if you're wrong. I don't know if you're right. I just don't know what you're talking about.
Start over. So the lump sum budgets that were passed were for fiscal year, I'm going to ask the people that passed, 2010, right? So. Okay. All right, yeah, I'll let.
Malcolm, those lump sum appropriations were Public Act 960956. The effective date of that was July 1 of 2010. That would have been for the next fiscal year 11.
If that's the case, then I'm not understanding what the issue would have been moving the money.
Well,
If that's the fiscal year was used, then you're telling me that's the year the budget was
I think you're
for.
just off a fiscal year. I'm going to try and help you. I just think you're off a fiscal year.
I apologize. I mean, are you asking me a question? I disagree. Respectfully, but I mean, again, I don't. What's the question then? I mean, again, the representative asked me a
Excuse me.
question, I was responding, I just,
It's 11 into...
So what we've been talking about for some time is transfer of funds that took place on June the 23rd of 2011. That would have been 10 days before the end of the, or 7 days
right,
before
okay,
the-
so then we're talking about something different, okay.
Okay, maybe we're getting on the same page now.
I think, I hope so. So that we're being clear, we're talking about a program that was started in calendar year 2010, right?
Fiscal
Really-
year 11.
Right, started there, right? So the program started in, let's just say, fall, if we're using the emails, fall of calendar year 10, fiscal year 11.
Correct.
When I was talking about funding transcending fiscal years, I was talking previous to June 30th, 2010, which fiscal year I believe should be fiscal year 2010.
The program wasn't announced until October of 2010.
But I think the representative was asking about the money.
I was asking about the money, and it would be carried forward from fiscal year 11 into 12. The unexpended amounts were transferred about 11 days into an unappropriated account.
Well, I wouldn't have
before
known
the end of
about,
the
I wouldn't
years.
have done that because I would have already been the director of CMS, but then I'd have been gone.
Well, that's,
Right.
this
I'm
is,
just saying,
this is where I had the most interest in the whole audit, actually, is the transfer of those monies, because that circumvents appropriations process, and you can continue to do that at the end of the fiscal year if there was any money left over. So that was always my concern.
Right.
And I believe that practice has since been stopped by the current comptroller.
Well, right, and
then
when we're calling it a practice, it was just,
also-
okay.
And also a repealer of the language from the Budget Implementation Act that allowed that. Okay, let us continue on, and I am really sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but I heard three different versions of that question that I wanted answered. Do we still do that?
And the answer would be no. Okay.
Senator Brady. I'm used to calling him Representative Brady.
Frank, you can call me whatever you want. Mr. Weems, thank you for being here. I don't believe this has been asked, but I think it's been talked around. There's an email dated December 13th, 2010. It's from Barbara Shaw to Billy Ocasio and Tony Irving, representing an upcoming meeting the four of you were to have to approve the provider agencies for NRI. My question is, what was discussed at this meeting? How did you vet the potential provider agencies, and did you reject any of them, and why, if you did?
I would have approved any of lead agencies. I didn't, that wasn't my role at all. I'm going to assume
Were you
that-
in the meeting?
I don't remember this meeting. However, I would have definitely talked to Barbara. I'm sure she would have, absolutely. So, but again, I wouldn't have approved any lead agencies.
Who did?
I'm not sure. Again, from this meeting, if you're talking about particularly about this meeting, if you're saying in general, it
Who
came
would
up
know
through the
who
agency.
approved?
I'm assuming Barbara, Tony.
But you did not evaluate the agencies.
I didn't evaluate. I talked to Barbara and Tony often, but I did not evaluate. No,
And you were never in the discussions of evaluation.
no, not evaluation. No,
So even your home community of Inglewood, you didn't
No.
have any discussions about who would get that?
no.
There's another email dated September 16th, where Barbara Shaw asked you why members of the governor's office were compiling a list of Chicago area ministers in connection with NRI. Your response was that you would explain it in person. What was the explanation you gave her, and why did it have to be in person?
And I'm just trying to remember. So we asked Barbara to put together a program, and because there were, people were very concerned about its progress, I think a lot of times there were folks that wanted to constantly look over her shoulder. And so I think part of Barbara's confiding in me about many things was because I was one of the people, again, when I actually came to her when we had started talking about this funding being available and that how it was going to be used and this investment in anti-violence that the governor was going to make. I was a sounding board for her. And let's be very honest here. It was, just as you all are suggesting, it was a big undertaking, and I think it was very stressful. So we talked often about just how to deal with people, and again, internally dealing with folks to make sure that we could stay on top of this and keep things moving. I don't remember that specific conversation. We had many.
Well, her question was why the governor's office was compiling a list of ministers. That was her question to you. You told her you would explain it in person. So my question to you is, why were you compiling a list of ministers, and what did you tell her in person?
I wasn't compiling a list of ministers. I think she was trying to ask me to see if I understood what was going on. And my thing is most of the time, you'd be typing a dissertation.
Did you understand what was going on?
I can't remember it specifically, but I'm sorry, Senator, but this kind of question or this kind of issue would come up, almost daily or weekly, because there would be issues with people wanting to do things different. And so I don't particularly remember this, the one that you're talking about, but I was a sounding board for her, and I think a lot of times I did that a lot in state government and try to talk to people to make sure that everybody was on the same page, that we understood one another. There are a lot of personalities, as I'm sure you all know, in the General Assembly.
So back to her question, if you were going to talk to her about why the governor's office was compiling a group of ministers, what did you find out?
Again, I don't specifically remember. I don't know.
There was a handout that was distributed on September 16th for a meeting with NRI lead agencies and applicants. And it expressed that a payment would be made in late October. Also, in the September 30th board meeting, you said the governor's office is committed to allocating some of the funds for the initiative immediately and will allocate the rest after the election. We've talked about that portion.
Again, we also talked that I didn't say that.
You see, why did the handout express that funds would be distributed in late October?
I didn't produce this document. I don't know.
So you were involved in funding the project, but you didn't have any conversations about how funds would be available in October?
No, I didn't produce this document.
You seem to be very intimately involved in the project. This is the funding, I mean, as you said,
No, this is
the state of Illinois, there's a difference between appropriation and cash.
Right.
In our state, unfortunately. Right. And this document says cash will be distributed in late October. And you were involved in that, and you're telling me that although you were intimately involved, particularly in the funding, no one ever talked to you about funds being distributed in October?
You're talking about a particular document that was, it looks like a Q&A that was handed out to what group, I'm not exactly sure, but the point I'm making is when I just talked about coordinating, what would have happened would have been at some point when there was really something happening, Barbara would let me know that there are going to be vouchers going in. Again, I don't know if it was related to this particular document, but I didn't produce this document. 64 give or take agencies under the governor at the time. I mean, they all have fiscal issues. I don't get down that low. I would talk to her about when she was ready to make sure that cash was ready at the comptroller's office.
All right, the one other email that, excuse me, I believe there's two. Did you attend any meetings with ministers?
I was at, yes, I would have attended some meetings where ministers were definitely there, yes.
And what's your recollection of the gist of those meetings?
Again, so all of and again, I'm just kind of looking at all of the minister meetings that I may have been at, and most of them, again, were talking about, is there really going to be funding available? At least that was what would have been directed to me. The other stuff was talking about the need that for those communities that something needs to be done. Again, you're talking about the ministers coming in every week with shooting numbers going up by 40 and 50. So it was, they were clamoring a lot.
I guess there's just one more email that I didn't, there was one other question. There's a lot of emails that have gone back and forth, but I haven't seen any that involve the governor. I've seen the governor's brother involved, but is it uncommon that, I mean,
I've never received an email from Governor Quinn other than if he sent something out like statewide, like, happy whatever, Veterans Day, I don't know. I never had an email from the governor that I can remember.
so all these people were emailing, but the governor wasn't involved in the emailing?
No.
Strings.
No.
And I guess the last question, this is an email. On September 15th, Barbara Shaw expressed concern to you that the Chicago Tribune reporter was planning to attend a meeting for NRI applicants. You followed up with her later and said that you would do the dirty work and kick out any members of the press who arrived. Why would you kick out the press?
You know what? Again, I'm gonna. So I've been in this situation probably a lot more than Barbara, and I think again, I'm not exactly sure.
I don't have a problem with you doing the dirty work for her, I guess, if she didn't want to do the dirty work. My question is, why is that dirty work, and why were you afraid of having the press in the meeting?
As you all may know, sometimes when things are taken out of context, like some of these emails, like a lot of things in state government. Again, and I'm speculating because I don't remember to this day, but there's a number of reasons why you don't want the press involved in government decisions until after they're made, until after you can kind of explain them. That is not something that I think is particularly, is particular to this particular situation. But yeah, again, the idea was, I knew that she was under a lot of stress.
Have anything to do with her statement earlier today that this was a political football from day one?
No. Now, there may be people that want to make it into a political football, but I will finish with you, Senator, by saying there's no political football. We're talking about children's lives. That's how we view the program.
We agree. We're talking about children's lives, and we don't think there's anything more important. But we also know we've got limited resources, and our concern is that, at least according to the Auditor General, these resources weren't put into place in the right way they should have been, and therefore we're concerned about the waste and the fact that the resources didn't get to as many children as they could have.
Representative Crespo.
Thank you, Chairman. Malcolm, we've been here it seems like 100 hours already, and I hope when I leave today that I can leave with something, that I learned something today.
Okay.
I'm struggling with that. We'll be back tomorrow. Maybe I'll learn something tomorrow out of this whole process. And you and I have had the opportunity to talk as well when you were head of CMS and you came before the Appropriations Committee. And we had good conversations about audit reports, about best practices and things like that because of our backgrounds, and I enjoyed that. One of the things I've learned today is we talk about children dying. And And the closest I've been involved with having a family member die was my uncle back. He owned a little restaurant on Taylor Street before I was born. My family still talks about that. But I'm here today, and I hear your story. I hear Billy Ocasio's story, and Kwame Raoul and some of the other folks. And I'm like, wow, it becomes more real. And, you know, I was so frustrated because I'm like, how can people not understand these are grant dollars, this is money thrown down the drain? And it so bothers me. But I can see why people feel so passionate, so strongly because of those experiences that they've been through. And I hope that we learn from that, okay, we understand that some folks might look beyond the funds not being used properly, whatever have you, because there's a bigger issue out here. I get that today. It becomes very real today. And I think, as I hear about the genesis of the program, it was some good intentions. You know, there's a need out there that some people understand better than most. I get that. And I also get that we brought some people in, some subject matter experts like Director Shaw, based on her expertise. But I'm going to share a couple of things with you, and I'm hoping I get at least this, and I'll get your opinion, because you probably weren't part of these decisions, but it was part of the audit report that starts on page 29 and talks about a meeting that was they were going to have with some of the aldermen, and Director Shaw brought in this MEE Productions. I'm not sure if you know who they are. I don't, but then I go to page 30, and this is, I think, goes to the gist of the problem, in my mind. I know we're looking for something else. We're looking for emails, try to connect the dots and figure something out. But what I'm getting so far, and tell me what you think about this, and I'm just reading verbatim from the audit report. One of the bullet points talks about this Tepocali Community Education Project, which is a Latino project or group. And they told the auditor another challenge faced with the program was MEE Productions' inability to provide Spanish material. MEE Productions was not prepared to work with the Latino community. So this is just from one of the providers out there. Black United Fund of Illinois, they stated, the overhead project cost box on the second page of the budget of each of the NRA program components was extremely frustrating due to the absence of written instructions and or guideline. Proviso Layton Council talked about they did not receive the outreach material. This was 80 days after the contract began. Association House of Chicago talked about that the planning for service delivery had been challenging due to the changing timeline for the start of the program and the NRI program design. And I can go on and on and on and on. Now, based on your experience, would you agree with me that at worst, it seems, this program was grossly mismanaged? You read the audit report. I know it was some time ago, and I know you read audit reports because we had this conversation years ago. And if you read the audit report the same way I did, and again, what I got from this was that, you know what, and this is not the only program in the state that's been mismanaged. I've been in office 7 years, and it's been so frustrating to me because it seems like every single RFP that we issue is flawed, is badly drafted, and that causes so many other problems. And it seems like there's good intentions, but yes, lousy management. Would you agree with me? Yes.
Representative, I think I get your point. I would not use terms like grossly mismanaged with programs like this. I think there are things, if you've been in state government long enough on the operating side of things, you are going to see that most things, just like legislation, in its first year, you have to do follow-up legislation. Same thing goes with programs. You have to look at them and fine-tune them. I think that if you looked at how this state operates in any other emergency situation, and I'm talking about from tornadoes to flooding to everything else when buildings collapse, there is no predetermined path of how to handle an emergency. Just doesn't, that's why it's an emergency. right? I would not characterize it as a gross mismanagement. I would characterize it as responding to the need. You mentioned earlier that some of the things like some of the information was not in Spanish to help Latino communities. I thought that's what I heard you say. You know, I don't think anybody involved in this meant to not have information for Latino citizens. Right? As you know, I'm married to one, and she's probably watching this. So I want to make sure I say that. But those are mistakes that are made when you're trying to do something, like you said, that's really important. There's nothing that's going to happen here that's going to make me feel bad about my involvement in the NRI program. It's just not going to happen. So I would not categorize it that way. I would say that it was a new program that after its first run could have improvements, but I wouldn't call it grossly mismanaged. And I'm just being honest.
I was hoping at least I could get that before I left. You know, and some of these are mistakes, and some I think are just obvious oversights. And the issue with the MEE that Director Shaw brought to the table, if you're going to deal with a Latino community, I'm Latino, and I can't even pronounce this Tepocacali, whatever it's called. At a minimum, you know, the most obvious thing, I need to make sure that I find a group that's going to deal with them that's sensitive to the Latino community. They came in and provide the materials. So to me, that's not even a mistake. To me, that's just a obvious oversight. And here's the sad part, that all these things are to the detriment of our African Americans and brown people like me, the people that we care about, because of that lack of knowledge. And what I still insist, at the end of the day, it's just mismanagement. You know, I've been trying to connect the dots like everybody else has. I've been looking at emails. I'm having a really difficult time. Maybe tomorrow we'll connect the big dot. I don't know. But I'm taking from this today. It's just, maybe it's too strong to say gross mismanagement. I'll take the gross away. I'll leave the mismanagement.
I'll meet you halfway. I think there were some things that we could have managed better.
Thank you very much. Good seeing you.
You too.
And say hi to your Latino wife.
I sure will.
Senator Martinez.
You know, I gotta just share this because it's important that there's many organizations in both the Black and the Latino community that their intentions are good, but sometimes they have not been trained properly. We have many agencies, you know, that are doing good work in our communities, but even yet, the training on these applications, on the monitoring system, on the auditing system, they're not trained sometimes to do this, you know, correctly, but that they want to participate because they need the dollars to go to the schools, go to the after-school programs and talk to the parents. All the intentions are there, you know, but when you talk about crime, you know, and what's going on, let me just share that I was one of those mothers that if it wasn't the fact that I took my daughter, grabbed her, and threw her on the floor behind a car, my daughter or myself would have been shot. Those are the kind of things that we live in the neighborhood with on a daily basis. Now more than ever, you know, that the management of this particular NRI lacked many fundamental parts. I think that I think Director Shaw said it, that, you know, sometimes we can't monitor the agency that are supposed to be the fiscal, you know, agents that are watching, but at the same time as those fiscal agents are not training our organizations on how to do the paperwork correctly. So I think that there is a whole lot that we can learn from this, but that the need, I'm with you on this, Malcolm, is the fact that we needed to do something right away. The crime situation, I mean, the violence situation with the shootings that were going on now and still going on today. Still going on today, when every time you pick up your phone or you turn the TV on, there is a shooting. Some shooting somewhere. And I think that that's what we have to take this report, this auditor's report, and the findings, and really make it work either for legislation or for things that we need to do. But right now, we haven't addressed the issue. All we're talking about is these findings and what happened, but we're not talking about what we need to do. And I know that you've worked in the community for many years, and I've seen you out there on your own, not during, just talking to people about programming and everything else that we need to continue to do in our communities, and I thank you for that. But I know that we have a lot of work to do. Our agencies have a lot of work to DHS, DCFS. When Representative Criswell talked about, why aren't we talking about the children that are in these, DCF programs, children that are sometimes dying because, not because of mismanagement, but because there's a lot of work that needs to be done in educating people, and that's what we should be concentrating our efforts on. So, when it comes to mismanagement of program, I just think that we have to we overreacted to things that were going on, but that we have to do a better job as we roll out, make sure that people are trained, especially in the communities, train these folks that want to help, that want to participate, that want to be able to bring some of these services to our children, to our parents, to our professionals that are there. Make sure that we just put more money into training our agents, our agencies out there, but making sure that our non-for-profit organizations that are working in our communities, both in the Black and brown neighborhood, and I guess across the whole entire state, making sure that they know what it is to how to dot an I and cross a T, and know that when you're talking about expenditures and when you're talking about state dollars, every dollar has to be accounted for. And I think that's what we have to start teaching our people more about accountability when it comes to state dollars. But that the intention and that the fact that we have a crisis on our hands that we don't seem to find any answers for, that's what I'm concerned with right now when I go out the neighborhood and see and hear shots, in the alleyways, on the streets, and hearing squad cars on a constant basis all through the night in our neighborhoods. And that's what I want to concentrate my energy on when it comes to educating, our community organizations about state dollars and how important it is, that accountability that needs to be taught to go with that. So thank you.
Thank you. Agreed.
Further questions, Representative Reis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You got a little reprieve there. The court reporter didn't know, did she? Did you speak to anyone from the governor's office prior to today's testimony? Since June of this year?
No, I have not. I've saw people, but I have not talked about this at all.
Anybody from the Audit Commission? Did you speak to anybody at the Audit Commission this summer?
No. Wait. No. No.
Anybody at CMS?
Have I spoke to anyone? I've spoke to people, not about this.
Did you speak to anybody at all this summer about this?
Yes.
Okay.
This young lady sitting next to me a lot.
Okay. You mentioned in your testimony earlier this evening that you were in New York working on a way of getting vendors paid.
Yeah.
You also mentioned in your resume that you're excellent analytical and financial skills.
Yes.
Why
My resume isn't under oath, though, right?
I know, but I'm leading here. Why, if there was money left over in fiscal year 10, and according to the comptroller's office, there were $6.37 billion in unpaid bills, why wasn't that extra money used to pay down bills? Aside from your strong feelings.
Yeah, we're talking about, okay. So
aside from your strong feelings for this program, why wasn't those vendors that had been owed money, sometimes months?
I just want to make sure I know what we're talking about. We're talking about June
of 10.
2010. Okay. I think, and again, it's actually not my decision, but what I believe was that the crisis of these children dying was paramount.
So not only, and I agree with you that it was fiscal year 10 money being forwarded into 11. Okay. I don't agree that it was done. And I think that's one of the glaring things that several of us have brought up, that's just not practices that should be done. And I'm glad there are steps being taken or have already been taken to stop that. That's a responsibility of the legislature and appropriation process. But you guys skirted it at the time, and it was what it was. Do we have the email dated August 20th? He needs one. Do we have copies for everybody too? Is this one about parent stipends? Is that the one about parent stipends?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just so everybody else that doesn't have it in front of them, on August 20th, 2010, Barbara Shaw emailed you discussing parent stipends and stating that they would be another good way to get money into the community. What was your response to this email?
I don't remember. Again, and I don't remember even what she asked me if she talked to me on that Sunday. But again, I'll tell you what I think about stipends right now. I mean, I think that part of that is if you have children in certain communities where they're working and their parents aren't working, or there's an effect that can be felt if you want certain things to work, the parents have to be involved, and some of that means them spending their actual time. And spending your time, if you're spending your time with your child, you're not somewhere else working so the stipends in my mind were designed to make sure that both the child and the parent could be involved together. And for some of these communities, again, where black and brown children live, the impact of not having this stuff. So I think that's where that conversation was and what that conversation was about.
Is that how you responded to her?
I'm not exactly sure. I can't really remember. But again, I don't think my belief about stipends for parents for high-risk children has changed.
There's been a lot of focus on your time in the GOMB, but in 6/11 you went over to CMS.
Yes.
So you were director of CMS from 6/11 through, you said?
Yeah, to last October.
Last October.
13.
Were you in any way involved with the audit, which was being conducted at the time you were still at CMS?
The first time I heard, the audit,
This audit that we're talking about.
that we're talking about, right. So my earliest memory is the first time that I really heard that there was a problem was I guess there was a CNN story, and then I don't know if the audit was started prior to that or after that, or I don't remember.
It was a year after that.
A year after,
It was in
okay.
the summer of 2012.
Right.
Auditor General Holland started his work on the audit as per the House resolution.
Okay.
And you were director of CMS at the time. So my question is were you involved in any way providing information to the Auditor General on his audit investigation?
Not that I remember.
Who in your staff would have been?
From GOMB.
No,
From
from
CMS.
CMS. And I'm talking about the emails. And we got about 350 pages of emails after the audit report was issued in February.
Okay.
And we went into CMS's office and started going through boxes. There's about 350 emails. So someone from CMS had to provide those emails.
Okay, but it wasn't me. I don't remember doing any of that. It could have been that the request came through the governor's office, and CMS is the IT infrastructure part of the state. So that our office would pull emails, no matter who you're asking for, it would come through CMS.
Can you clarify, did you guys ask for emails as part of the audit process?
I'm not following your line of questioning, Representative Rice. Maybe you can help me out.
The 350 emails that we were given,
I don't know what 350 emails you're talking about.
350 pages, were given to us in May, members of the Audit Commission, and they came.
Somebody needs to clarify for me.
I know, but he had to request them, right? The emails that started everything this summer, weren't those requested by the Auditor General's staff as part of their audit of this program during that 2-year period?
I don't remember getting, I'm sorry, I don't recall getting any requests from me to do anything specific. My relationship with the Auditor General has been pretty good. I would have.
Malcolm, hold on. General Holland?
Representative Rice, are you leading or suggesting that maybe I didn't get everything I needed?
Not for the lack of trying.
Well, you'd be wrong.
And that's the question I do, if that's the case, if every email that had anything related to it.
So are you referring to some other document that's out there that suggests that I didn't get everything I needed?
Well, here's an email that was missing. I mean, everybody responded to each other many times, but there's certain times when people didn't respond to each other. And as you know, we tried this summer through FOIA requests and stuff to get emails, and we were blocked at every turn. Not one bit of concern about your job. I'm wondering if all the emails were delivered.
You know, I have read suggestions that maybe I didn't get access to everything I needed to do my audit. I have read those suggestions, and I think you're familiar with those suggestions.
Yes.
And would that be some of the information that's contained in this June 10th letter from Representative Kaye that cites a June 10th?
No.
It's nothing to do with.
I've never seen that letter.
The one from Representative Kaye to Representative Rice?
Okay, well, I'm going to pretend to be you guys today because I haven't seen I don't see what you're talking about.
Well, I'll give it to you.
Okay.
Because there is a report attached from Garrett Discovery. And there is a suggestion in there, in the body of this report, that's dated June 10th. June 10th, an important date, that suggests that. June 10th of which year? June 10th of 2014, just recently. Okay. And in this report, it makes the suggestion that maybe I didn't get everything. And suggests that because Malcolm Wings was the director of CMS, it was in control of the very system that contained the ESI requested by the Auditor General, but was unable to verify whether or not it got all the emails. And in addition, I'm bothered by this report because it's dated June 10th. And at the very same time, on June 10th, it says, how can we deal with this from somebody who's been subpoenaed before the commission? Now, the subpoenas weren't issued until June the 25th. I don't know how you issue a report on June the 10th. Now, that's only one half of this report that suggests I didn't get everything.
Well, and
the other half of the report is the emails that there was a question about, did we have access to Barbara Shaw's vault? Did we have access to all of her emails? And the short answer to that question is yes. But we didn't we don't keep every email that Barbara Shaw produced if it didn't relate to the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. And we didn't, if it didn't relate, we're not about collecting emails. We got 50,000 pages of documentation. We collected what we needed to accomplish the goals and mission as sponsored by you in HR 1110. And I think we did a pretty good job. And we got everything we needed, every single email, access to every single email we needed, and every one of those emails that we needed in order to reach our goal that this was a hastily developed program that did not have good management and not good planning. All of those problems, we had access to those, and I think we did a pretty good audit, and we got everything we needed.
Hey, Sherman, can we get a copy of that letter for the committee as well?
And I was referring to my letter to the governor's office and to the new director, acting director of CMS this summer with emails, not Representative's K letter that he's referring to, and I'll certainly take a look at it when I get it. I guess where I was going with this was that when we were here in July, we were told by one of the subpoenaed witnesses that there was 107,000 emails. We didn't know what they were related to. Were they all related to NRI? We didn't know, but they said they would work with us. And after many months of going back and forth, I think it was trimmed down, and then Governor claimed executive or client attorney privilege on a bunch of them. And I, for 1 second, don't want to take away from the unblemished credibility of Auditor General Holland. Speaker Holland, it sounds good. Not 1 second, and I think you know me, and I know you, and I would never do that. But I just don't know from the standpoint of everybody getting all the emails that connect these dots. And if someone will tell me we got everything, and that's why we asked to supervise the search in September. Just supervise, stand over the back and watch the keywords that are typed in, the spacings, the periods, everything. That's all we wanted to see. And it would spit out a report, this big IT program you guys put in 25, it would spit out every search that's been conducted, right? That's all we wanted to do was supervise. If that was the case, I'd go home and say, you know what? The Audit Commission got everything, Auditor General got everything, and we would know that we had truly every email. But we don't know that. Now, I'm going to take the Auditor General's thing that he got everything he needed to do his work, outlined in the House resolution, with the caveat that maybe we didn't get all the emails and how the program was put together ahead of time. Maybe we'll never know. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Raul.
I don't know how to follow, but I'll try. Mr. Weems, I'm not going to ask you about any emails because I think we've exhausted that line of questioning. To start by saying focusing in on just kind of the audit findings, and you've been asked, and I think Ms. Shaw was asked before, and I think I think Senator Martinez just did a great job of highlighting the fact that the Auditor General's findings does a great job of highlighting a desperate need in your and my community with regards to a network of community-based organizations that have been serving the community for a long time that have to make tough choices between whether they keep their lights on, when they pay the limited staff that they pay, and because we've historically underinvested in such community-based organizations. You have the benefit, as you expressed kind of in your opening statement, of being familiar with the neighborhoods and probably also familiar with some of these community-based organizations. So Are you familiar with building with a lot of these community-based organizations?
Absolutely. I think to your point and Senator Martinez's point is that, and actually to Representative Crespo's point, when we talk about the things that could have been done better, that's what all of that is. I have not witnessed any programmatic activity that has taken place that has gone on without a hitch, right? And we learn from that because whatever that cause is important enough. So I think you're right. I think, the first time we rode a bike, any of us just rode it without falling. So I think you're correct to really say that we invest in these types of programs or this type of funding or in trying to come up with a program that prevents all this violence. You have to be willing to allow organizations to grow and be really ready to do it and learn, like you said, to be taught how to do things. So I think that's absolutely right.
Now, let me make clear, and I agree with Representative Crespo and the Auditor General that we ought to seek for each and every one of these organizations to provide documentation and proof of everything that they've done. The conclusion that I don't think that a lot of people are reading into the Auditor General's findings is that the notion that there are some shortcoming in some of this compliance reporting necessarily concludes that they didn't do anything. Is that your feeling and understanding of such organizations?
Right. It kind of sounds as if people are saying because there were some mistakes made that nothing good happened, and that's I think the question was asked. I might have been Representative Sandak that asked me if I knew how many children we saved. I mean, I think there was a lot of good things that were done. There were a lot of things that could have been done better. But again, it was the first. This program was in its first year, and again, usually what we do when we try something that we know is important, we try again and try to do it better. And again, capacity building is how you do that. The truth of the matter, and I don't want to take too much time, but the truth of the matter is that most of the people that can reach young people that are at risk were usually at-risk people. So when you try to bring in someone that maybe has great intentions, maybe has the money to do something, has the resources to do something, all of that is great, and they may be able to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, but until you can present all of that in a way that the people that are on the front line can handle and then incorporate into their message, you're going to have a hard time reaching the people that need to be helped, because it's not just that there's a bunch of very well-educated people sitting around killing each other waiting for somebody to tell them that they shouldn't do it. These are people that don't know, and that way of violence and all of that is all they do know. Again, not to equate it to something else, but many of us have relatives or loved ones that are in the military, and when they come back home from a very dangerous assignments, and they come back and they're not the same. And we talk about treating those people and helping them to integrate them back into society. But we're not talking about that in the same way when we talk about a 13-year-old that has probably witnessed 2 or 3 homicides in their life, right around the corner for them, in the same building they live in. We don't treat it the same way. So I think when you talked about capacity building and we talk about other emergencies that exist, right? It's a crisis. It's an emergency. You have damaged children that only see violence, and then we talk to them about, and the people that are going to treat them about, hey, make sure you fill out all this paperwork and this paperwork. Those people make a decision like, I'll get to that, because I'm going to do this first. So I think there's training that needs to be done because they need to learn how to do it. But it doesn't mean that they weren't doing a service with taxpayers' dollars that taxpayers could be proud of.
Now, much has been made about the selection of the organizations and the process and the question, whatever the process. process was, mention has been made of best practices in selection of organizations. Can you discuss a little bit of how just general objective criteria doesn't necessarily do the work to determine who at best is servicing these particular communities on the front line, that it just doesn't fit into a nice and easy box?
I could say this because, again, like I said earlier, I'm not the program expert, so I don't, want to use my personal opinion to be that. But what I will say is there are examples of organizations that are well-funded and well put together that can't get enough kids to participate in their program because either those kids and those families are like, who are these people? They don't live here with us. And then there's an opportunity for them to go to a program that's either in their church or at their local whatever center where they know the people, where their older brother may have grown up with the guy and used to be in a gang with the guy that's now teaching the program. They trust him. He understands what they're talking about. So that exists all the time.
And I'm going to talk about a topic that I try to stay away from is aldermen and ministers. There's been a lot of mention about aldermen and ministers. One of the realities that's unfortunate for people like Senator Martinez and myself and is that in Chicago, it's a little bit unlike in other parts of the state where the state senator or state rep is the big honcho in the area. In Chicago, the alderman's office is where people come to lodge a lot of their complaints and where my curb needs cementing or whatever, my cracked sidewalk, it's everything. They go to their alderman. And in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and I'm not saying I don't get these visits, it was about crime. And aldermen tend to have, as a result, their ear to the ground as to, who in their respective areas can help deal with this. Could that have come into play as to why aldermen were consulted?
That's what I believe. Yeah, that's what I believe. Again, I don't remember exactly who came up with it, but that's what I believed, is that you went to the people that were constantly being bombarded with all of these things. I think you said it correctly. Until I started working in state government, I'll be honest, I didn't have a lot of knowledge of how the state senator or state representative really worked, right? In fact, I used to get them mixed up with with the congressman versus state, so and I think that's a lot of people, especially in the communities that we're talking about. So I think that was what the goal was, to get people that were closer to the issue and actually closer to the organizations that were on the ground. And not that state senators and state representatives aren't close to those organizations, but I think, like you said, Senator, that people come to them when they're desperate and they're crying, and the children get shot and they're storming an alderman's office.
Now, the other place they go to is their minister, right?
It's usually the minister bringing them to the altar. I mean, yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And that seems to have been recognized by elected officials, politicians, Republican and Democrat alike. That's why during these times it's proximity. It's proximity.
The
politicians are flocking to the ministers to find out what's going on in their respective communities and to try to come up with a plan to react to it.
Churches are bellwethers, especially in African American community, I'm sure, and Latinos, and maybe in all communities, really. I mean, but churches are really good. People go there on a regular basis.
Now, I'm going to have you help me maybe explain to some others who may not be familiar with these neighborhoods, other than seeing them on a list of neighborhoods and statistical criteria to these labels for these geographic areas. Quite frankly, in my area, there's a debate of where Woodlawn ends and West Woodlawn begins, where Hyde Park ends and Grand Boulevard begins, where Hyde Park ends and Kenwood begins, and where Grand Boulevard intersects with Oakland, and where Woodlawn intersects with Grand Crossing. What is the dividing line between Inglewood and West Inglewood?
Again, this is not an official answer in any form or fashion, but we tend to, for us, it was, Ogden Park when I was a kid, and so when you think of either Loomis or you think of Racine, kind of being the divider, but that's if you asked a real estate agent, they'd give you the real answer. And in fact, until I started working in state government, I didn't know there was a West Inglewood. It was just Inglewood. I'll be honest.
I'm just now learning that too.
Okay. Right.
Related to that question, so I'm familiar with a lot of these organizations that have been touched by this, and that they may be delegated to serve a particular neighborhood. So, for instance, an organization serving Woodlawn necessarily, if they're effectively doing their job, has impact on Hyde Park.
Correct. I think that's absolutely true. Where the children going to be drawn from, right? It's just like if you had a boys club in your neighborhood. I mean, it usually, at the boys club, it was kind of anybody within probably a 5 or 10 mile location. So when we talk about where the providers of the service, where they're physically located, that doesn't mean that's where all of the participants, the children, are coming from.
So sometimes you may have an infrastructure, let's say if we identify a Inglewood versus West Inglewood, whatever that definition means, maybe you have a better infrastructure in Inglewood that serves both Inglewood and West Inglewood, wherever that is.
Or you have the one location allow more kids to come, right? So it has the capacity to kind of deal with kids that would be, again, across some train tracks. Usually, it's something like that, some physical divider, but yeah.
Now, the negative implication of that 7 of the 20 most dangerous neighborhoods weren't served is that 13 of the most dangerous neighborhoods were
right.
served. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
And some of those neighborhoods neighbor the 7 that were allegedly
yes,
not.
Right up against, correct.
Efficacy. I think there's probably consistent agreement that investment in early childhood education has an effect on reducing violence. But can you measure when a child is 4 years old, if you invested dollars in an early childhood education program, whether during that time you've done that?
Yeah, I don't know how you could. I have a 20-year-old son. I don't know if anything, how it, again, we just try, right?
Likewise, it's very difficult to measure. I mean, the mayor was in this very room a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about what we have to do is comprehensive, and it involves enhanced policing, it involves, in his opinion, enhanced sentencing, and he says it involves some social services, some investment in social service, but all of these things comprehensively. Doesn't that also make it difficult to measure in isolation whether a program, which was discontinued was
Successful or not?
successful at reducing, I mean, the question of whether it was successful at reducing violence.
Right.
If the University of Chicago Crime Lab was going to figure that out, I'm really curious to
know how they were gonna do it?
To know how they were going to do that.
Again, there's no way. I don't know. I don't know.
Finally, much has been made about money getting out before the elections. Was there any money that got out for the NRI before the election? Was there any money that?
Again, not that I know of. I remember it, for the most part, everything being after the election.
I mean, wasn't it in fact sometime in the spring of the next year?
I mean, I think the bulk of it, there might have been some stuff that started to go out in December maybe, or end of November. But again, the bulk of the money was much later,
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Berrickman.
Sure. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Williams, for being here. Let's maybe continue along the line of questions that were just asked. I think you just suggested the bulk of the money, and and I want to bring this back to the audit.
Okay.
A lot of high-level discussion about violence prevention efforts, which is useful conversations, but I don't know that they're necessarily directly pertinent to the audit. So, fair enough. But to the audit and to your comments here, the bulk of the money you thought was spent whenever it was in the spring. It appears there was this effort in October to make a significant payment. Barb Shaw, in fact, submitted a voucher for what was $19 million, which I think is a significant amount of the NRI money. $19 million was submitted by voucher on October 12th. She said in that, when that was submitted, that the first payments for the Safety Networks grantees and the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative grantees need to be made as soon as possible. Shortly thereafter, she instructed her staff to cancel the voucher and submit a new one for $10.3 million, explaining that the Violence Prevention Authority had been informed that there were insufficient funds to make the full payment on the initial voucher. Do you remember any of this?
Not really. I'm sorry, not really. But I do remember that the idea that I thought Barbara had discussed was for the startup, right? So for people to get started, you had lead agencies that were going to be working with folks, and part of this whole idea of the state taking a long time to pay these organizations. I knew that there was, and this is in a number of different grants where you try to get 20% up front to start or something of that nature, but I don't remember the exact dates.
Okay, well, again, to the facts that exist here, and I know there's been suggestions that no harm, no foul, don't worry everyone, all the money was spent after the election or in the spring or whenever it was, but the facts clearly show a different story. Maybe you don't remember those facts, but that's what it says on paper. The voucher was submitted. It was a voucher for a very considerable amount of money, $19 million, and evidently, I'm not sure if the check bounced or what communication happened internally, but something happened that made those at IVPA say, we need to cancel the check request for $19 million and reduce it to 10.3. And that's what it appears happened. That was all in October 2010. You don't remember any of that?
I'm just, I don't remember it specifically, no. I just remember,
generally?
No, I remember that, again, what I just explained to you, that there was a desire to have startup seed cash or seed money for these organizations starting the program. Again, the exact dollar amount escapes me.
fund transfer to the non-appropriated fund. In your comments, you referenced an effort that was made, I believe, in June of 2010 to identify, you said you went through the 900 funds. Some effort was done at GOMB to go through those funds to identify what I presume were excess dollars that had been appropriated but not spent as we approached the end of that fiscal year, and you provided a report to your boss.
Made a recommendation.
Okay, so give me the context of that. I mean, what exactly was happening there? What was-
We do budget exercises all the time, and we tend to find out how much funding or appropriation is left throughout different points in the year, right? So that we can estimate what's going to be remain unspent, as it'll go towards paying down the backlog of bills. So what would have happened at that time was we would have looked at, upon everyone deciding that we want to look at these anti-violence efforts, what did we have available for those efforts? And we would have taken a look at what appropriation was unspent, and then we would have looked at what opportunities we had to spend that money in or invest it, let's say, in anti-violence.
And so what was the result of your analysis, generally?
That knowing what the investment was intended to be, you wanted to make sure that we could do it, and where and how could we do it. So the how would be what funds. Again, it wasn't just spending the money on anything; it was particularly for anti-violence efforts. So we looked, you look at all the funds as they relate to the agencies that deal with anti-violence efforts, and we identified a fund at IVPA.
Okay, and that, what dollar amount did you see when you made your analysis?
So first, an analysis of what was unspent. Again, I don't remember what the exact number was, but I think at the time it could have been as much as $100 million or something very high like that. When it came down to looking at stuff for anti-violence, we weren't looking at everything that was unspent for that. So again, I'm just trying to remember as much of this as I can. We would have looked at, started having conversations, how much do we want to invest? And here we found a vehicle, right? And that vehicle would have been the IVPA fund.
Okay, and again, all this though was sometime prior to June 30th, prior to the end of the fiscal year 2010.
Right.
Okay, and so you identified this fund that had some amount of money, maybe a significant amount of money.
Mm-hmm. Wait, there was only two funds. I should say this, two appropriations for 2010, right? So it wasn't like we had to look for where the appropriation that existed was. We were looking for where we were going to put it.
Okay, and the timing though is what I'm missing here, because you're telling me that effort all happened before June 30th.
Yes.
And everything that we have seen in this audit has suggested that this program that ultimately became defined as NRI really started in August of 2010.
Okay. So, I mean,
all the testimony I've heard today from you and others was that there were these series of meetings, which we seem to have documented generally, that occurred with community leaders and clergy members and aldermen and others in that August timeframe that resulted in this demand for doing something which was ultimately NRI. But what I'm hearing from you is that there was really this effort in sometime before June 30th to identify funding sources for anti-violence.
Well, it's funding sources, and for whatever other things that were going on in that particular fiscal year that we had funding to address. Because there would have been other things. There would have been some other program that might have been ending where they had more people in that program than they may have thought they would, and they were going to run a deficit and they needed money or funding for it. So it wasn't all just for the anti-violence efforts that would have been in this new program.
And I want to involve the Auditor General here as he reviews the notes. I still don't think we're all clear on what occurred and when.
Can I ask a question, maybe to help? Malcolm, are you talking about other anti-violence programs other than the Neighborhood Recovery Initiative?
I'm talking about not any particular program. I'm just talking about funding that was unspent, right, or appropriation that was unused at the end of fiscal year 2010.
Okay.
Because it didn't have a program
To be
name.
put for what purpose?
Again, that's kind of what I was talking about a little bit earlier, is that when this violence was starting to go, where it was becoming more evident that there was going to be an increase in the homicide, the number of homicides and the shooting, we started getting people coming in to the governor's office. You had clergy, you had community groups, you had families. We had the Anti-Violence Commission established by then. So there was all of these different people coming in talking about what was going on. I think, I'm just trying to explain to answer the question.
I understand, but again, we've been here all day. And this is the first that we've heard that those activities were occurring before June 30th.
Again, I'm trying to make sure that we're very clear. I'm not talking about a program that existed. What I'm talking about is a need. And so we didn't have a program. We had a need, right? There was an issue. There was something that was affecting citizens. So the idea was, at some point, you had to take, because the fiscal year was ending. And so if you were going to address that need, you needed to have funding. So I didn't have any, I didn't know, we didn't know what the program was going to be.
So I'm looking at my audit. This is past audit work. This is not something future. This is the compliance examination for the Violence Prevention Authority for the 2 years ended June 30th of 2010. 2 years ended June 30th, 2010.
Okay.
Okay. So now I'm looking at the Special Projects Fund, Illinois Violence Prevention Authority, the 318 fund. Okay. And in that fund, there was at the time $5.8 million. And I'm going to run down what the programs were for you. There was a Blue Cross Blue Shield grant, $18,000, a CEJA grant for $375,000, Voices for Illinois Children, $358,000. This is the Safety Networks grant program, $2.8 million. Another Safety Networks program, $9.5. A refund to the state board. None of that counts. A refund to CEJA for $8,100, but that takes us up to the 5.8. That's how much money was in the 318 fund, okay? Pardon? Spent from. That's the money that was spent from the 318 fund. Are you suggesting that you were looking for money from other funds to put into the 318 fund, other than these purposes? Because now you go to the next audit, which is shows the 318 fund for the year ended June 30th of 2011. Fast forward 12 months. Now we're into the next year, and there's $28.9 million in that fund, and 24 from the governor's Neighborhood Recovery Initiative. That was the bulk of it. So what you're talking about, transferring money, you're looking for other funds to transfer, fill in that blank, for what purpose, fill in that blank.
Are you asking? I'm trying to figure out what the question is, because I think I got two things going. So that one, again, what I am talking about is during, and I'm going to make it easy so we can all stay together here. So we know that when we talk about fiscal year 2010, we're talking about a fiscal year that started July 1, 2009,
correct,
ends June 30th, 2010.
Correct.
During that year, during that fiscal year, we didn't move any funding into the unappropriated fund until June. That would have been 2010. So it would not have shown up as anything budgeted
Were these fund sweeps? Were these fund sweeps?
Were what?
Fund sweeps? Is that what you're talking about? Fund sweeps?
No, I'm not talking about fund sweeps at all. I'm talking about a transfer or a deposit into the unappropriated fund of GRF, which is something that by the budget bill we were allowed to do as an expense. So, and again, I apologize. I lived in this world for budgets and getting calendar years and fiscal years kind of mixed up. So that's why I'm trying to say it slow to make sure we're all staying together. But what we're talking about is there were two big lump sums that Governor Quinn was given for fiscal year 2010. By the time he got to the end of fiscal year 2010, there was money left in those two big lump sums, right? And so we said, how is there a way to deal with the violence? We're getting all of these requests from the community to do something, and we had some funding, but the time was running out. So we made a deposit of funding or appropriation, if you will, however you want to call it, into the unappropriated fund that resided at IVPA before June 30th of 2010, without knowing exactly how we were going to use it, but we knew that we wanted to make an investment in anti-violence. Didn't have a program at the time. So again, as I think to your point, Representative, earlier was people keep talking about August and late July or August or whatever. That's when they started to formulate a program. I think what I was talking about, which is always the case when you work in the budget office, is before you see anything happen, there has to be some discussion about how we're going to pay for it. And that's what I am discussing with you, is that we seeded money in the IVPA unappropriated fund from fiscal year 2010.
Right,
The program took place in fiscal year 2011, but we seeded that money at the end of 10.
And I think that's something new for the commission to understand, that thought process occurred at the end of fiscal year 10, when we were of the understanding it really began in that fall of 20.
That is when the program began.
Well, it's also when there were the budget decisions made about it. 20 million to 30 million to 50 million.
I just have a question to make sure that I understand what you're saying. If the money was in the correct fiscal year, then is there even an issue about money? If you thought the money started in fiscal year 11, then there really is no harm, no foul.
Right, but what you're saying is that it was fiscal year 11 money because you took it from 10, you figured out where it was at in 10, you moved it in 10 to a non-appropriated fund and then began spending it at 11.
Correct.
That is new.
If it exists, if in fact that happened, which I would not stipulate to that at all.
Okay.
I would suggest that maybe Malcolm's got his fiscal years mixed up. How much money was
Again, I'm
transferred
answering the question. If the question was asked, and I just answered the question. Now,
that answer works pretty good on fiscal year 11. Doesn't work very well on fiscal year 10.
No, I know, because normally you couldn't do that. But what happened with those two lump sums was the definition for expense. One of the definitions for expense that particular fiscal year that I remember is you can count a deposit into another fund as an expense.
Where's that email? That particular legal opinion came.
And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm telling you the auspices under which we operated. I think that at the very least, what we're talking about is there was some ambiguity in that particular.
That opinion, which was given to us by Mr. David Hall. David Hall, who is he worked for Representative Reis. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. It was.
David Hall.
I was only joking.
I know a David Hall. I don't know.
He's the, it is getting late. He's the Deputy Counsel for the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, okay? So on June the 23rd, okay, of 2011, now that would be fiscal year 11, right? Fiscal year 11. There's 7 days left in June in that fiscal year, not including lapse period. 2011. Now let me finish now, just before you go. The question was about transferring money and would that be spending? And here is the legal opinion. Barbara, I just wanted to be clear on the use of the lump sum. Shifting the money to funds would be, quote, spending, unquote, the money for the purposes of C2 of the IGA, the Intergovernmental Agreement. However, to move the money beyond those funds, additional spending authority would be needed after fiscal year 11, unless the funds somehow do not need appropriate authority. Many thanks. Well, they drove a truck through that little opinion. That's the two-sentence opinion. That they put that money then into the 318 fund, and they called that transfer spending. They called the transfer of funds spending, and this is the conversation we had with Barbara Shaw earlier today, where not one recipient received any of that money, not one provider, not one lead agency, not one anybody. It was just moved from one fund and called a transfer and called it spending. That's the discussion that we've had earlier today, and we had the last meeting. But that was 2011, not 2010.
I apologize because I believe I'm lost then. Do we all look, well, again, I don't want to argue.
You may take the opinion of Mr. David Hall, but we would take it.
I think we don't agree that how we handled it. I'm sure of that. Oh yeah, that part I'm sure of. I'm just talking about getting the chronological order of how we started, how we believe we started, what I remember us starting in terms of making sure funding was available.
Okay.
Again, the bottom line was there was no program at that time.
Okay, so here's the other troubling aspect of what you see in this audit. There's and we've heard about this all day, and I know you haven't been here all day, but we've had a number of witnesses before us, and we've heard this this recurring theme, some of which I think we've heard some from you, that there were these meetings in the fall, a series of meetings with stakeholders, with administration officials, yourself being involved in at least some of those. All these meetings that occurred, but no one today has been able to tell us with any sort of definitive answer as to how the decision was made to choose the communities, the neighborhoods that received the funds. There's been a lot of suggestions that it kind of came from within. Do you know who made that decision? Somebody said.
I don't know of any one person that made the. I don't know of that. My understanding, what I thought was that there was data that was used by IVPA, and that's how that was done. I did not know of a person coming in, sitting down, and looking over anyone's shoulder, saying this is who we should pick or who we shouldn't pick.
Well, there's been suggestions that there might have been data, but no one's been able to produce any. In fact, or more on this and have produced nothing. Nobody here today has produced anything other than general assertions that there was some data. But there is suggestion after suggestion in the audit that decisions were made by the governor's office. This community needs to be, the south suburbs need to be added. That came from, I don't know, Billy Ocasio told us earlier that he suggested it, it went in, and it came out and it was approved. Barb Shaw told us the south suburbs weren't in, but she was told they were to be included later. Can you give it, Hermosa got added to the mix.
This is the programmatic aspect. I did not have.
But you were in the meetings.
I was in meeting, but no meeting where that was discussed where someone said pick these. No.
No, okay. And then the same thing, right, for the agencies, the providers that provided these services, that were chosen to provide the services in the community. We've had all day of testimony, and I cannot tell you with a straight face that I have a clear understanding of who made the decision to approve the providers. what's clear, Barb Shaw told us this morning that there were these meetings with aldermen. The aldermen suggested providers. They came back to her. Her staff did things. And then there were these meetings that were had with the governor's senior staff. Maybe the governor himself is suggested in here. And that the governor's office was involved in approving these providers. You in any of those meetings?
No, so at most, at times, I did hear about after they were decided. I mean, I looked at the list of the people that, where they were going to be, but I wasn't there to hear anyone. And I definitely was not in any meeting where the governor said, hey, this is who we're going to pick.
But this is the problem, and again, to the audit says that these decisions that were made on which provider to choose was flawed throughout. And what it appears is that that decision was coming out of the governor's office. But no one who's been here today can tell us that they were the ones making those decisions, and they can't tell us who was.
Again, I mean, you get other people to ask, but I don't know who any one person that made any of those decisions like that.
So, and it's troubling though, because and I've heard the testimony from a lot of people today that have said that this is personal to them, that this program has a personal importance to them. But for all the people that were involved, it seems like given the priority this program was was meant to have, wouldn't someone that was making decisions on which communities to fund would make sure that we were funding the most violent communities? Wouldn't the person making the decision on which providers to administer the services, wouldn't someone care that we were choosing the most qualified provider? How come in all of these meetings that were had that no one can say who made decisions, no one has suggested that there was any thought put into making sure the money went into the most violent communities and that it was administered by the most qualified provider? Why don't I walk away from this today?
Because I think you just said two different things. We were told that there was data, and that's how the communities were chosen. You're talking about now about the choosing of who's actually going to participate, those providers. I'll be honest with you, I don't care what provider it is. The point is the program and affecting those communities. I never cared about who the providers were really. But that would be some. Again, I was the director of CMS. We did contracts, huge contracts all the time. I never sat down and found out who was on the evaluation team. They just announced the winners, and so because that's inconsequential to most of us. Who ends up with it? The issue for the budget person is making sure there's funding available and we're making an investment. That was my role.
But this was an important factor to some people in the communities, first of all, that weren't selected, and that has been well known that there were communities who were excluded from this program who felt slighted. That's evidence. Democrats from Chicago, legislators and aldermen, community members have all made public statements saying that this program was flawed because their violent community was excluded. And nowhere do I see where anyone making the decision on which communities to select said, are we targeting the most violent communities?
Again, other than them saying we're using data to arrive at the communities that we are going to include, there was no body saying here are the communities we're going to exclude. That's not how that worked. Again, at least to my knowledge. And so I wasn't really interested in who the actual providers at the end were. The communities, as we were told, were based on data. Now, I have not seen that data as well. If that's your point, I haven't seen it either. I haven't seen it either.
There were communities where the decision to go with one provider over another resulted in significant backlash locally in those communities because people in that community felt that there was a decision made to go with a certain provider who might have had political ties to the governor's office rather than a more qualified provider in the community. That's, again, that is evidence in
I
this
think that's
audit.
some opinion that people have said that, but I don't know that to be true. I don't know that there was a lot of other more qualified providers out there than the ones I don't know that for a fact, but people have their opinions about different organizations. That part is definitely true.
Right, and the concern here is that the people making the decision, who I've still not clearly drawn the line as to who that was, but whomever it was, evidently, there's no evidence, there's no suggestion today that the person making that decision cared about that. That's my point.
Again, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't.
Jerry Sturmer, you know, I mean, again, the frustration that comes from here is that there's been a lot of suggestions of the importance of violence prevention initiatives. But what you see, when you go to the facts of what happened, what you see is maybe there was planning in June to find money for a program that didn't exist. Definitely in August, there were these rushed efforts, hastily implemented is what the audit says, rushed efforts to put together a program for which, again, what I'm hearing is no one made a priority in those rushed meetings to figure out whether we were spending money in the most violent neighborhoods or whether the providers were the most qualified. And here's what, on top of that, you have these statements like Jerry Sturmer makes in January of 2011, where he says they and many others will also start talking immediately about the neighborhood recovery as being funded by dramatic reductions in existing programs that are clearly accountable and successful. As you know, I am not at all persuaded that any of the ideas in neighborhood recovery have any solid evidence to show they achieve their goals. For us, reading this information, the rushed nature of the program, the fact that you were at these IVPA board meetings suggesting that you were trying to get money out, the fact that Barb Shaw signed vouchers in October trying to get money out, the fact that Jerry Sturmer, doesn't think the program works. I think the fact that we don't know if we put money in the most violent communities, the fact that we don't know whether the most qualified providers were picked, and that no one making the decisions seemed to, for as much as they wanted to make a meaningful impact on combating violence, they didn't seem to prioritize those important decisions that you would think would be a priority for what was a $55 million program. Are we putting it in the right spot, and are we giving it to someone who has demonstrated an ability to make a meaningful impact with those dollars in this community? And the troubling part of this audit is to read all of this evidence and draw that conclusion and have people like Jerry Sturmer say, I don't even believe in it. And try to make sense of all of this and understand who was making, ultimately, at the end of the day, who was, how many hours of testimony have we had? So who made these decisions and why were they made? This many hours in today, I still don't know. And I don't know that you're able to answer them for me. And that's frustrating as a lawmaker. Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Riboletti.
Thank you.
If I may I please use the bathroom? It's been a while. I'm serious.
Actually, let's, why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Please, thank you. I apologize for
We'll be at ease for 5 minutes. They got bottles of water right over there. Just ask to go, yeah.